Hello, fellow night owl, and welcome to tonight's bedtime history session. Whether you're joining us for the first time or returning for another captivating tale, I'm delighted that you've chosen to spend some quality time with me tonight. Before we embark on our journey back in time to the peculiar realm of medieval medicine, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you right now. We're curious to discover where our community of nocturnal historians resides. If you find yourself enjoying this serene historical storytelling, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Now, make yourself comfortable, nestle under the covers if you'd like, and let your mind drift back with me through the centuries to a very different time, the Middle Ages. Imagine a small, rustic village. Dirt paths wind between simple houses made of wood and thatch. Smoke rises from cooking fires as peasants toil in the surrounding fields, their backs bent under the weight of their labor. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows across the hamlet as another day draws to a close. But amidst the usual sights and sounds of village life, an undercurrent of unease permeates the air. Worried whispers pass between neighbors, and fertile glances are cast at one cottage in particular. Inside, a young man lies fevered and aching, his body racked by a dread disease. The Black Death has arrived. The year is 1348. And this scene unfolds in countless villages and towns across Europe as the most notorious pandemic of the Middle Ages begins its relentless march. One by one, communities are brought to their knees as the plague sweeps through the population like a merciless reaper. But before we zoom out to consider the broader impact of this catastrophe, let us linger here a moment longer in this one afflicted household to delve into the human tragedy at its core. The family gathers around the bedside of their eldest son, his once strong body now laid low by the pestilence. Just days ago he was working the fields alongside his father, dreaming of the future, making plans for the harvest, and perhaps even starting a family someday. How swiftly those dreams have turned to dust. It all began with a fever and chills that ravaged his body. Then the aches set in, a deep throbbing pain in his joints and head. But the worst of all were the swellings, the dreadful buboes that gave this strain of plague its name. Hard, painful lumps emerged in his groin, under his arms, on his neck, steadily growing, turning black, and sometimes rupturing to ooze foul pus and blood. His mother hardly left his side, mopping his brow with a damp cloth, murmuring prayers, and desperately mixing picasses and remedies in hopes of fighting off this unseen assailant. But in her heart, a grim certainty was taking hold. She had heard the rumors and recognized the signs. The Black Death did not relent its victims. In desperation, the family even called upon the local healer, a bent old man who arrived smelling of garlic and muttering incantations. He cast stones and bones, applied foul-smelling ointments, lit candles and chanted spells, but his arsenal of folk remedies and superstitions was woefully inadequate. After all, what good were leeches and bloodletting against a foe so implacable? A contagion so virulent that it could strike down the sturdiest soul in a matter of days. In a time before microscopes and petri dishes, before the very concept of germ theory, what hope was there? And so, with a final rattling gasp, the young man surrendered his spirit. His family was left to collapse in grief, their anguished sobs echoing into the night. There would be no funeral, no gatherings to celebrate his memory and bid him farewell. Such practices had been banned for fear of spreading the pestilence further. Instead, he would be hastily buried in a shallow grave, or perhaps even consigned to the flames of a mass grave already piled high with victims. His family's tragedy was far from unique. Across this village and the entire continent, similar scenes of heartbreak and despair are unfolding. As the Black Death tightens its grip, it will leave no life untouched. In the coming months, this village will lose over half its population. This staggering toll is repeated in hamlet after hamlet, town after town. Fields will go untended, and livestock will roam untamed as able-bodied laborers succumb. The social order will strain and buckle as lords perish alongside peasants, with those who should provide leadership and guidance also laid low. Some who contract the disease may be lucky enough to survive, but they will bear the scars, both physical and emotional, for the rest of their lives. Fingers, toes, even limbs may be lost to gangrene. Minds will be haunted by the memory of loved ones of entire families, snuffed out like so many candles. And in the aftermath, as the shattered survivors emerge to pick up the pieces, they will find their world irrevocably changed. With so many dead, labor will be in short supply, shifting the balance of power between lord and serf. Long-standing social structures will begin to crumble, paving the way for uprisings and revolts in years to come. Even the church, that unshakable bedrock of medieval life, will find its authority challenged as prayers seem to go unanswered and pious men of God perish alongside sinners. Some will see the plague as a punishment from the Almighty, a great reckoning for the sins of man. Others will question how a loving God could inflict such suffering upon his children. These are the far-reaching consequences that will ripple out from our single tragic village, from the heartbreak of one family multiplied by thousands upon thousands. The Black Death will serve as a grim reminder of how fragile life could be in an age before modern medicine, when the very air you breathed could spell your doom. But the sad truth is, even in the years between these great pandemic waves, the shadow of illness and death was never far away for medieval people. In our next section, we'll delve into some of the endemic diseases that made reaching adulthood a formidable challenge, as well as some medical practices that often proved detrimental. I hope you'll stay with me. For now, let's take a moment of silence for all those lives cut short and the families torn apart by the merciless plague. As we drift off to sleep in our safe and comfortable modern world, let's hold a space of gratitude in our hearts for the medical knowledge and treatments we often take for granted. Until next time, dear listener, I wish you a restful night and pleasant dreams. This is your host, bidding you good night. The villagers had endured their share of hardships over the years, from failed crops to harsh winters. However, nothing could have prepared them for the devastation wrought by the Black Death. As the plague ravaged their tight-knit community, it left a trail of suffering and sorrow that would haunt them for generations. Amidst the chaos and despair, a few brave souls risked their lives to care for the sick and dying. Among them was Father John, the local priest. He worked tirelessly to offer comfort and last rites to those stricken by the plague. Armed with little more than prayer and a few meager supplies, Father John entered the homes of the afflicted, his face covered with a crude beak-like mask stuffed with sweet-smelling herbs which he believed would protect him from the disease. One such parishioner was a young mother named Agnes. When her husband fell ill with the telltale signs of the plague, she knew there was little hope for his recovery. She watched helplessly as he writhed in agony, his body racked with fever and pain. The buboes, those grotesque swellings in his armpits and groin, grew larger and more inflamed with each passing day. Despite the dire circumstances, Agnes did her best to keep him comfortable, bathing his brow with cool water and murmuring soothing words. But in the end, the plague proved too formidable, and he succumbed to the disease. Bereft and alone, Agnes now faced the daunting task of caring for their 3 young children on her own. She was constantly worried about keeping them safe from the illness that had claimed their father. The village was a shadow of its former self, with many families shattered by loss. The once bustling market square stood eerily quiet, as people feared to gather in crowds lest they catch the plague. As the death toll mounted, the local authorities grew increasingly desperate to contain the spread of the disease. They ordered the homes of the infected to be boarded up, trapping the sick and their families inside to await their fate. Healthy villagers were instructed to stay indoors and avoid contact with their neighbors. However, these measures did little to stem the tide of death and misery. Agnes lived in constant fear that the plague would claim her children as it had their father. She watched them closely for any sign of illness, her heart racing at the slightest cough or sniffle. The children, too young to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation, often begged to go outside and play with their friends. It broke Agnes' heart to have to keep them cooped up inside, but she knew it was for their own protection. One day, as Agnes was preparing a meager meal of stale bread and thin gruel, she heard a knock at the door. Wearily, she cracked it open to find Father John standing outside, his mask firmly in place. He told her that he had come to check on her and the children, offering what little comfort he could. Agnes hesitated for a moment, fearful of letting anyone into their home, but the kind look in the priest's eyes reassured her, and she stepped aside to let him enter. Father John sat with the family, offering prayers and words of encouragement. He listened patiently as Agnes poured out her grief and fear. His presence was a balm to her troubled soul. When he bid her farewell, Agnes felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. She understood that the road ahead would be arduous and challenging, but she drew strength from the knowledge that she was not alone. As the prolonged and oppressive days of the plague unfolded, Agnes and her children clung to each other for support. They found fleeting moments of joy, engaging in quiet games and sharing stories by candlelight. Agnes instilled in her children the significance of cleanliness, ensuring they washed their hands and faces regularly. Although it was a small act, it provided her with a sense of control in a world that seemed to have lost its sanity. Gradually, painfully, the village began to recover from the devastating impact of the Black Death. The sick were tended to as best as possible, and the deceased were buried in mass graves outside the village walls. Those who survived emerged from their homes, blinking in the sunlight, like moles emerging from their burrows. They mourned the loss of loved ones, but also celebrated their survival through the most trying times. For Agnes and her children, life would never be the same. They would always carry the physical and emotional scars of the plague with them. However, they had each other, and that was enough. As they pieced together the fragments of their shattered lives, they did so with a newfound appreciation for the simple pleasures of each day: a warm meal, a gentle hug, a cozy bed to sleep in at night. These were the things that truly mattered. As the years passed, the memory of the Black Death began to fade. Like a bad dream gradually losing its hold, the village slowly rebuilt itself, stone by stone and family by family. New babies were born, old wounds healed, and life resumed its course. Yet for those who had endured the plague, the spectre of illness and death remained ever present in their thoughts. They were acutely aware of the fragility of life and the swiftness with which it could be snatched away. In a world devoid of modern medicine, where even a minor scratch could be fatal, people learned to cherish each moment as if it were their last. They shared stories of their lost loved ones, keeping their memories alive even as their bodies returned to dust. As the sun set over the medieval village, casting long shadows across the fields and lanes, the survivors of the Black Death settled in for another night. They drew their loved ones close, whispered prayers of gratitude and protection, and drifted off to sleep. Their dreams haunted by the ghosts of the past, yet their hearts brimmed with hope for the future. They knew that even in the darkest times, there was always a glimmer of light to be found. Whether it was the kindness of a neighbor, the love of a family member, or the simple beauty of a sunset, these were the things that made life worth living. And as long as they had each other, they knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, one day at a time. The story of Agnes and her family is just one of countless tales of resilience and perseverance in the face of unimaginable adversity. Throughout the Middle Ages, people from all walks of life faced the constant threat of disease and death. From the humble peasant to the mighty king, no one was immune to the ravages of illness. One of the most notorious diseases of the medieval period was leprosy. This chronic infectious disease, caused by a bacteria called Mycobacterium leprae, primarily affected the skin, peripheral nerves, upper respiratory tract, and eyes. In medieval times, leprosy was a highly stigmatized condition, with those afflicted often cast out of society and forced to live in isolation. The origins of leprosy are somewhat unclear, but it is believed to have first appeared in ancient civilizations like Egypt and China. By the Middle Ages, it had spread throughout Europe, leading to the establishment of hundreds of leper colonies to house the afflicted. These colonies, often situated on the outskirts of towns and cities, provided care and support for those afflicted with leprosy. However, they also served to segregate them from the rest of society. One of the most renowned leper colonies of the medieval era was the village of Am in Derbyshire, England. In 1665, when the devastating plague struck the village, the residents made a courageous and selfless decision to quarantine themselves to prevent the disease from spreading to neighboring towns. For an arduous 14 months, the villagers endured unimaginable suffering and loss, with many succumbing to the plague. Despite the immense sacrifice, their efforts paid off, and the plague was contained within the village walls. The story of Am stands as a testament to the indomitable strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. It also underscores the significance of community and solidarity during times of crisis. By working together and supporting one another, the villages of Aim were able to weather the storm and emerge stronger on the other side. Of course, not everyone was fortunate during the medieval period when it came to diseases. Many fell victim to the myriad illnesses that plagued the population, including smallpox, tuberculosis, dissenter's disease, and influenza. Without access to modern medical treatments, the death toll from these diseases was staggering, with entire families and communities wiped out in a matter of weeks. One of the most tragic examples of this was the bubonic plague that struck Europe in the 14th century, also known as the Black Death. This pandemic was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis and spread rapidly through fleas that infested rats. The symptoms were horrific, with victims developing painful swollen buboes in their armpits, neck, and groin, along with fever, chills, and vomiting. The Black Death claimed the lives of an estimated 75 to 200 million people across Eurasia and North Africa, with some cities and towns losing up to 60% of their population. The pandemic's impact was felt for generations, leaving entire regions devastated and depopulated. It served as a stark reminder of life's fragility in the face of an invisible and deadly enemy. Amidst such unimaginable tragedy, glimmers of hope and humanity emerged. Doctors and healers tirelessly treated the sick, often at great personal risk. Religious orders established hospitals and hospices, providing comfort and solace in their final moments. In some cases, communities like the village of Am banded together to support one another and curb the disease's spread. These stories remind us that even in the darkest times, the human spirit endures. Medieval people coped with the constant threat of illness and death through compassion, resilience, and solidarity. While we may never fully comprehend their suffering, we honor their memory by learning from their experiences and striving to create a world where no one faces such unimaginable hardship alone. Reflecting on the legacy of medieval diseases, we note that many of the same challenges persist today. From the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic to the rise of antibiotic-resistant superbugs, we grapple with the global threat of infectious diseases. However, we possess tools and knowledge beyond our medieval counterparts' imagination. Advancements in medical science, including vaccines, antibiotics, and cutting-edge diagnostic technologies, have given us a fighting chance against formidable foes. While progress is ongoing, we find solace in the achievements and lessons learned. One crucial lesson is the value of public health measures in preventing disease spread. From basic hygiene practices like hand washing and sanitation to more complex interventions like quarantine and contact tracing, we now recognize the critical role these measures play in safeguarding our communities. We've also come to appreciate the significance of scientific research and collaboration in developing new treatments and therapies. For instance, the rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines stands as a testament to the power of international cooperation and innovative thinking in the face of a global crisis. However, we still face substantial challenges in ensuring equitable access to healthcare and medical resources. Just as in medieval times, marginalized communities often bear the brunt of infectious disease outbreaks due to limited access to testing, treatment, and support services. Addressing these disparities requires a concerted effort from governments, healthcare providers, and civil society organizations. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from the history of medieval diseases is the importance of compassion and empathy in the face of suffering. Whether it's a neighbor falling ill with a plague or a loved one battling a chronic condition, we are all connected by our shared vulnerability and humanity. By reaching out to those in need, offering comfort and support where we can, and working together to build a more just and equitable world, we honor the memory of those who came before us and create a brighter future for generations to come. This task demands courage, perseverance, and a significant amount of hope. But if the stories of our medieval ancestors have taught us anything, it's that even in the face of unimaginable odds, the human spirit always finds a way to endure. As we lay our heads down to sleep, let us hold fast to that spirit of resilience and compassion. Let us remember the sacrifices and struggles of those who came before us and draw strength from their example as we confront the challenges of our own time. In the end, It is our shared humanity that will guide us through these trying times. Within that shared humanity, we will discover the hope and healing we desperately need. The Flagellants, a group of self-flagellating individuals, marched through the town, their bare backs marked by the blood and raw skin from their self-inflicted whippings. They believed that by punishing themselves, they could atone for humanity's sins and persuade God to lift the plague from their lands. As they chanted and flailed, onlookers were caught between reverence and unease. Some even joined in, seeking any glimmer of hope in these dark times. However, not everyone placed their faith solely in divine intervention. In the monasteries and convents scattered across Europe, monks and nuns embraced the selfless duty of caring for the sick and dying. They provided the meager comfort they could, offering food, clean water, and a compassionate presence to those suffering from the plague and other illnesses. Many saw this as a holy calling, a way to live out their Christian values of charity and compassion. Among these caregivers was Sister Maria, a young nun in a small Italian convent near Naples. Despite being only in her early 20s, Maria had already witnessed a significant amount of sickness and death. When the Black Death struck her community, she volunteered to help tend to the afflicted, viewing it as her sacred duty. Day after day, Maria entered the makeshift ward where dozens of plague victims lay suffering. The air was thick with the stench of disease and despair, but she persevered, offering sips of water to parched lips and whispering prayers to those in their final moments. It was grueling and heartbreaking work, but Maria found strength in her faith and the belief that she was fulfilling God's will. Despite the best efforts of caregivers like Maria, the toll of the plague was devastating. In some regions, it is estimated that up to 60% of the population perished. Entire families were wiped out, leaving behind ghost towns scattered with the unburied dead. It appeared that regardless of the prayers, repentance, or remedies sought, death relentlessly advanced across the continent. The overwhelming scale of the tragedy led many to a grim acceptance, resigning to fate. They viewed the plague as a divine retribution, an unstoppable force that could only be endured, not overcome. In a world already marked by fleeting and uncertain life, the specter of disease intensified the sense of helplessness and inevitability. Yet, even in the darkest times, glimmers of hope and progress emerged. While medieval Europe grappled with the plague, the Islamic world made significant strides in medical knowledge and practice. Scholars and physicians like Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna, compiled extensive medical encyclopedias that would shape healthcare for centuries. Born in 980 AD in present-day Uzbekistan, Ibn Sina was a true polymath, excelling in diverse fields such as philosophy, astronomy, and poetry. However, his contributions to medicine earned him enduring recognition. His most renowned work, the Canon of Medicine, served as a comprehensive guide to medical theory and treatment, drawing upon both Greco-Roman and Persian traditions. The canon covered a broad spectrum of topics, including anatomy and physiology, disease diagnosis, and treatment. It introduced concepts like quarantine to control the spread of illness and emphasized the significance of diet and hygiene in maintaining health. Ibn Sina also pioneered the use of clinical trials to assess the effectiveness of treatments, a practice that would become a cornerstone of modern medicine. Although the canon was initially written in Arabic, it was eventually translated into Latin and other languages, spreading its influence across Europe and beyond. It became a standard text in medical schools and universities, shaping the education of countless physicians for over 600 years. Of course, the impact of works like the canon was gradual and uneven. In medieval Europe, many medical practitioners clung to ancient and ineffective methods like bloodletting and purging. However, some pioneers sought to integrate new knowledge and techniques into their practice. One such pioneer was Trotula of Salerno, a female physician who lived and worked in the coastal town of Salerno, Italy, during the 11th or 12th century. Salerno was home to one of the world's first medical schools, and Trotula was one of its most renowned teachers and practitioners. At a time when women were largely excluded from formal medical education, Trotula broke barriers and made significant contributions to the field. She wrote several influential texts on women's health issues, including gynecology, obstetrics, and cosmetics. Her works challenged prevailing notions about female physiology, and offered practical advice for treating common ailments. Trotula's legacy extended far beyond her own lifetime. Her texts were widely circulated and translated, influencing medical practice across Europe for centuries. She became a symbol of the potential for women to excel in medicine and science despite the many obstacles they faced. Stories like those of Ibans, Sina, and Trotula offer a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, there were individuals working to push the boundaries of knowledge and improve the human condition. Their efforts may have been overshadowed by the immense suffering of the era, but they helped lay the foundation for the medical advances that would come in later centuries. As we return to our plague-stricken village, years after the Black Death first emerged, we can see small signs of progress and resilience. The streets are cleaner with gutters and rudimentary sanitation systems helping to control the spread of disease. Some of those who survived the initial onslaught have developed a degree of immunity and pass on their hard-earned wisdom to the next generation. Life is still hard and illness still claims far too many lives. But there's a sense of cautious optimism. We believe that by working together and staying vigilant, we can keep the worst at bay. The memories of those lost to the plague are never far from our minds, but they serve as a reminder of life's preciousness and fragility. Looking back from our modern vantage point, it's easy to see how far we've come in fighting disease. Advances in medical science, technology, and public health have transformed our ability to prevent, diagnose, and treat illnesses. We have vaccines to protect against once deadly scourges like smallpox and antibiotics to combat infections that used to be fatal. However, we also know that our work is far from over. New diseases continue to emerge, old ones evolve and resurge, and access to quality healthcare remains uneven globally. The COVID-19 pandemic has served as a stark reminder of our vulnerability to nature's whims and our dependence on each other for survival and well-being. In that sense, perhaps we're not so different from our medieval ancestors. We may have more knowledge and tools, but we still face the same fundamental challenges: protecting ourselves and our loved ones from harm, finding meaning and purpose in adversity, and building a kinder, safer, and more just world for all. As we drift off to sleep, let's hold fast to the lessons of history. Let's honor the stories of those who came before us, who faced unimaginable hardships, and found the strength to persevere. Let's continue their work of building a better future, one where no one has to face the terror of illness and death alone. And let's never forget the power of compassion and the importance of caring for one another, even in the darkest of times. For it is in those moments of shared humanity that we find the light that guides us through the storm. So rest now and dream of a world where we all look out for each other, where healing and hope are always within reach. As the barber surgeon navigated the winding streets of the town, his sharp eyes scanned the crowd, searching for signs of illness or injury that might necessitate his expertise. Tall and lean, with a thick beard and a well-worn leather satchel slung over his shoulder, he carried an array of gleaming blades, saws, and other implements that clinked with each step. The townspeople eyed him with weary glances, some even crossing themselves or muttering prayers under their breath. They were acutely aware of the pain and suffering that could befall those in the hands of a man like him. Yet, in times of dire need, when a loved one lay dying from fever or a festering wound, they had little choice but to seek his assistance. Finally, he arrived at a small thatched-roof cottage on the town's outskirts. A woman with a haggard face and red-rimmed eyes stood in the doorway, her hands anxiously wringing. "Please, sir," she implored. "My husband has fallen gravely ill. Can you help him?" The barber surgeon simply nodded and followed her inside. The cottage was dimly lit and cramped, with a low ceiling and a dirt floor. In the corner, on a straw mattress, lay the woman's husband. He was ghostly pale, his skin slick with sweat, and his breathing labored. The surgeon set down his satchel and began his examination, feeling his forehead for fever and checking his pulse. As he lifted the man's shirt, he noticed a large, swollen lump in his armpit. "A boo," the unmistakable sign of the dreaded bubonic plague, he exclaimed. "I'm afraid it's the pestilence," he said grimly, turning to the wife. "There's not much I can do, but I can try to alleviate his suffering." With deafening movements, he reached into his bag and withdrew a sharp blade and a cup. He then lanced the boo, sending a stream of foul-smelling pus flowing out. The man groaned in agony, but the surgeon paid him no mind. Instead, he placed the cup over the wound and lit a small fire underneath, hoping to draw out the bad humors. As he worked, he recited a prayer to St. Roch, the patron saint of plague victims. Over the years, he had witnessed countless lives claimed by this terrible illness, and he knew that only divine intervention could truly save a man from its clutches. The wife watched anxiously as the surgeon continued his ministrations, applying piccases of herbs and even a few drops of mercury to the wound. She knew in her heart that it was likely futile, that her beloved husband would soon join the ranks of the dead. Yet she clung to the faintest glimmer of hope, praying desperately for a miracle. Finally, the surgeon stood up, wiped his bloody hands on a rag, and solemnly declared, "I've done all I can. Now it's in God's hands." He packed up his tools and left a few meager supplies with the wife before taking his leave. As he stepped out into the street, a sense of helplessness washed over him. Despite his knowledge and skill, there was still so much about the workings of the human body and the nature of disease that eluded him. He knew he was not alone in this frustration. Across Europe, physicians, apothecaries, and healers of all kinds were grappling with the same challenges. They delved into ancient texts and debated theories of medicine, desperately seeking a key to unlocking the secrets of health and illness. But for now, the barber surgeon could only continue his rounds, offering what meager aid and comfort he could to the suffering masses. He sent up a silent prayer for the stricken man and his family, hoping against hope that they might be spared the worst of the pestilence's ravages. As he walked on through the town, an unsettling sense of unease seemed to hang over everything like a dark pall. It was as if the very air itself was tainted with sickness and death. He knew that the plague was far from the only scourge threatening the lives of the people in these dark times. There were numerous other illnesses that relentlessly plagued the land, striking down young and old alike with brutal efficiency. Dysentery, typhoid fever, smallpox, and tuberculosis were the names whispered in fearful tones by those who had witnessed their loved ones succumbing to their terrible grip. The barber surgeon had borne witness to it all firsthand. He had seen the retching and bleeding of dysentery victims, their bodies wasted away to mere skeletons, the high-raging fevers and delirium of those stricken with typhoid, the oozing pustules that covered the faces of smallpox sufferers, the racking coughs and bloody sputum of consumptives slowly drowning in their own lungs. It seemed at times as if the very fabric of society was being unraveled by the relentless onslaught of these diseases. Families were torn apart, whole villages decimated, and the ranks of the dead swelled with each passing day. Yet life continued as it always had. The fields still needed to be tilled, the livestock tended, and the daily rituals of existence carried out. Even in the face of such overwhelming sorrow and loss, the people clung to their faith, finding solace in the small moments of joy and love that sustained them through the darkest of times. As the barber surgeon made his way back to his humble abode on the edge of town, he couldn't help but reflect on the peculiar duality of his profession. He was both revered and reviled by the common folk, seen as a bearer of both healing and suffering. In truth, he understood that the remedies and treatments he offered were often little more than guesswork and superstition, passed down from master to apprentice over the generations. The humoral theory that guided so much of medieval medicine, with its emphasis on balancing the body's 4 vital fluids, seemed increasingly inadequate in the face of the complex realities of disease. Yet he also recognized that his role extended far beyond the mere physical ministrations he provided. In a world fraught with uncertainty and danger, he stood as a beacon of hope and comfort to those in despair. He thought of all the hands he had held as they slipped from this mortal coil, all the brows he had soothed with cool cloths and gentle words, and all the prayers he had whispered over the dying in their final moments. It was a heavy burden to bear, but one he shouldered willingly, for in the end, what else could he do but offer what little solace and succor he could to his fellow man in their time of greatest need? In a world so full of darkness and suffering, it was the smallest acts of kindness and compassion that shone the brightest. As he reached his doorstep and stepped inside, the barber surgeon sent up one final prayer for the souls of all those who had fallen victim to the merciless ravages of disease. "May they find peace in the hereafter," he whispered. and may those left behind find the strength to carry on in their absence." With that, he closed his eyes and let the weariness of the day wash over him, knowing that tomorrow would bring fresh challenges and fresh sorrows, but also perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope amidst the gathering gloom. As the barber-surgeon made his way through the winding streets of the town, his reputation preceded him. Whispers followed in his wake. Some sang his praises as a skilled healer, while others murmured darkly of patients who had met grisly fates under his knife. The truth, as ever, likely lay somewhere in between. He cut an imposing figure as he strode into the market square, his leather apron stained with the telltale signs of his trade. At his side hung an array of gleaming blades, saws, and other implements whose purposes were best left to the imagination. The locals eyed him wearily, unsure whether to approach or keep their distance. But approach they did, for what choice did they have? In a world where even a simple cut could fester and lead to a slow, agonizing demise, the services of a barber-surgeon were always in high demand. A queue began to form, with the townspeople lining up to place their lives and well-being in the hands of this enigmatic figure. One by one, they stepped forward to present their ailments and injuries. A farmer, his hand mangled by a plough blade, a young mother desperate to save her feverish child, and an elderly man, his skin mottled with weeping sores, all sought the barber-surgeon's expertise. The barber-surgeon listened to each in turn, his expression inscrutable behind his bushy beard. For some, he prescribed picases and tinctures concocted from herbs and ingredients that only he seemed to know. For others, he recommended more drastic measures, such as bloodletting to balance the humors or the application of leeches to draw out bad blood. And for an unfortunate few, he grimly suggested surgery, an amputation to prevent the spread of gangrene, or the agonizing process of tree panning to relieve pressure on the brain. Throughout it all, the question lingered. Were these treatments truly effective, or were they simply the desperate grasping of a society still in the dark about the true causes of illness and disease? It was a question that even the most learned medical minds of the age struggled to answer. For in truth, the medieval understanding of the human body and how it functioned was woefully inadequate. Physicians and healers alike were guided by ancient theories and superstitions that, while occasionally containing kernels of wisdom, were just as often wildly off the mark. Chief among these was the concept of the four humours, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, which were thought to govern health and personality. An imbalance of these humours was believed to be the root cause of most ailments, and treatments were designed to restore equilibrium through whatever means necessary. This often led to practices that, to modern eyes, seem misguided at best and downright barbaric at worst. Bloodletting, for instance, was a highly popular practice based on the belief that draining excess or bad blood could cure a wide range of ailments. In reality, it only weakened already frail patients, and in some cases likely hastened their death. Similarly, the use of leeches and other parasites to draw out corrupt humours was widespread, despite the lack of evidence of their effectiveness. More exotic treatments were also prevalent, including the application of hot plasters made from dung or rotting meat, the consumption of powdered mummies or unicorn horns, and the use of charms and amulets to ward off evil spirits believed to cause disease. Perhaps the most terrifying of all was the practice of trepation, which involved drilling or scraping holes in the skull to treat various conditions, from headaches to epilepsy and mental disorders. While some patients miraculously survived the ordeal, many undoubtedly succumbed to infection or trauma in the days and weeks following the gruesome procedure. Throughout history, death loomed large. As in a world without antibiotics, even minor wounds and illnesses could quickly become fatal if left untreated or exacerbated by well-meaning but misguided attempts at healing. Childbirth, too, was an immensely perilous undertaking, with an estimated 1 in 3 women dying as a result of complications during labor. Additionally, great pandemics periodically swept through medieval societies, claiming countless lives and sowing terror in their wake. Foremost among these was the Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century and wiped out an estimated 30 to 60% of the population within a few years. The cause of the plague remained unknown to medieval physicians, who attributed it to various factors, including poisoned air, divine retribution, or even the alignment of the planets. treatments ranged from ineffective methods, such as the burning of aromatic herbs or the wearing of magical amulets, to downright bizarre practices. In the 14th century, a doctor recommended a peculiar concoction of ground snakes, pigeon's blood, and chunks of trile to ward off the plague. However, these measures proved ineffective in curbing the tide of death and suffering. Entire villages were decimated, their inhabitants succumbing one by one until only ghosts and memories remained. The social and economic repercussions of the plague were immense and far-reaching, reshaping the very fabric of medieval life in ways that would reverberate for generations. Despite the darkness, there were glimmers of hope and progress. In the Islamic world, scholars and physicians made significant strides in understanding anatomy, physiology, and disease. Figures like Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna, compiled extensive medical encyclopedias that would become the standard texts for centuries. In Europe, too, there were signs of a gradual shift towards a more empirical, evidence-based approach to medicine. The establishment of early hospitals and medical schools, such as the renowned scholar Medica Salernitana in Italy, provided a platform for the dissemination of knowledge and the training of a new generation of practitioners. Furthermore, some forward-thinking cities began taking steps to improve sanitation and hygiene, recognizing the link between filth and disease. The construction of sewers and public latrines, the paving of streets, and the regulation of food markets all contributed to reducing the spread of contagion, even though the underlying causes remained a mystery. These were small steps on a long and arduous journey. For the vast majority of people in medieval times, life remained precarious, forever at the mercy of famine, war, and pestilence. The idea of a world without the constant specter of death and suffering was almost unimaginable. Yet slowly but surely, that world was coming into being. With each passing year, new discoveries and innovations gradually dispelled the darkness of superstition and ignorance, paving the way for the light of reason and science. Although the journey ahead would be long and fraught with setbacks and reversals, the destination remained clear for the barber surgeon making his rounds in that nameless medieval town. Naturally, such lofty thoughts were likely far from his mind. His world was a grim one, filled with blood, pus, screaming patients, and harrowing choices, where life and death teetered on the edge of a knife. Yet, in his own way, he was part of that grand human struggle towards understanding and mastery over the unseen forces that governed our fragile existence. Through trial and error, and the hard-won knowledge passed down through generations, he and his fellow surgeons laid the foundations for the medical marvels of the future. With a heavy apron, he continued his work, applying his piccases and wielding his blades, doing his best to alleviate the suffering of his fellow man. It was a grim and thankless task, but one that someone had to undertake. In the face of the vast unknown and the unyielding cruelty of the cosmos, what choice did any of us have but to reach out into the darkness, to offer comfort and healing, to rage against the dying of the light? These were the thoughts that danced through the barber surgeon's mind as he made his way back to his humble abode that evening, his body weary from the day's labors. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, more pain, more fear, more desperate battles against the ravages of disease and decay. But for now, he could find solace in the knowledge that he had contributed to pushing back against the tide of human suffering. And perhaps that was all any of us could hope for, to leave the world a little better than we found it, to sow the seeds of a brighter future that we ourselves might never witness. It was a fragile hope, but one that burned brightly in the hearts of healers, dreamers, seekers, and sages who dared to envision a world beyond death's shadow. Let us raise a glass to those unsung heroes of the medieval age, barber surgeons, wise women, alchemists, and apothecaries, who, despite unimaginable odds, kept hope alive. Their legacy, written in blood and sweat, in the cries of the sick and dying, echoed through centuries, paving the way for modern medicine. Let us never forget the harsh lessons of those dark times, the grim reminders of our fragility and the preciousness of life. Ultimately, we are all heirs to that timeless struggle to push back against mortality, find meaning and purpose, and escape oblivion. This struggle persists in hospitals, research labs, the quiet determination of doctors and nurses, and the indomitable spirit of patients and their loved ones. Though the road ahead may be long and perilous, We find solace in knowing we are part of a noble lineage stretching back to civilization's dawn. Let us press on, guided by the wisdom of ages, reason and compassion, striving towards that shining city on the hill, a world where death and suffering hold no sway, where every child has the chance to live a dignified and purposeful life, free from disease and despair. It may always be just out of reach, a dream that may never be fully realized, but it is a dream worth fighting for, living for, and sustaining our species through the darkest nights and coldest winters. And so we continue our journey, you and I, the living and the dead, the dreamers and the healers, the barber surgeons and the plague doctors. All of us are bound together by the profound and awe-inspiring beauty that is the human condition. May we never lose sight of this beauty, even in the face of darkness and despair. May we never cease to strive for a better world, a kinder world, a world where love and light reign supreme. For in the end, that is all we have, the love we share, the light we kindle, the dreams we dare to dream. This gift of life is fragile and fleeting, but it is ours to cherish and hold, to nurture and defend. So let us venture forth, you and I, into the vast unknown, armed with the courage of our convictions and the strength of our compassion. Let us resist the encroaching darkness now and always. For as long as there is breath in our bodies and hope in our hearts, let us remember the barber surgeons and their kind, those brave and broken souls who came before us. They fought the good fight even in the face of overwhelming odds. And let us honor their memory by continuing their work, by taking up the mantle of healing and hope, by daring to dream of a world beyond the shadow of death. It is a long and winding road that stretches before us, paved with tears and laughter, with sorrow and joy, with pain and beauty beyond measure. But it is our road to walk, our story to tell, our legacy to leave. So let us walk it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, now and always, even unto the ends of the earth. For in the end, that is all we can do. Stand together against the darkness, reach out into the unknown, light a candle in the window of the world, and dare to dream of brighter days to come. As the barber surgeon continued his journey from town to town, he carried with him a variety of instruments and techniques that were common in medieval medicine. His toolkit included razors for bloodletting, leeches for drawing out bad humors, and even crude drills for trepanning. The practice of boring holes into the skull to relieve pressure or release evil spirits was prevalent during the Middle Ages. While these treatments may seem barbaric or misguided to us today, they were widely accepted and even respected. The prevailing belief was that illness resulted from an imbalance of the four bodily fluids or humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Bleeding a patient, sometimes excessively, was thought to restore this delicate balance and promote healing. Despite often being untrained and illiterate, the barber surgeon held a position of some esteem in medieval society. In addition to performing medical procedures, they also took on the roles of dentist, embalmer, and even barber, hence the title. However, the lack of formal education and reliance on tradition rather than science meant that these medical practitioners often did more harm than good. For instance, consider the story of a young woman suffering from a high fever and severe abdominal pain. The local barber surgeon was called to her bedside and promptly diagnosed an excess of black bile. He proceeded to slice open a vein and drain copious amounts of blood, leaving the patient weak and delirious. When her condition failed to improve, he resorted to applying hot pickuses to her stomach, which only served to intensify her agony. Sadly, this woman's fate was not uncommon in the Middle Ages. Many patients suffered needlessly at the hands of well-intentioned but misguided healers who lacked a true understanding of the human body and the causes of disease. Some even met their untimely demise as a direct result of the treatments inflicted upon them. It's important to note, however, that not all medical care in the medieval period was provided by barber surgeons. Monasteries often served as centers of healing, with monks and nuns tending to the sick and infirm as part of their religious duties. These monastic infirmaries provided a haven of rest and comfort for the afflicted, even though their treatments were not significantly more effective than those of barber surgeons. Apothecaries also played a crucial role in medieval healthcare. These early pharmacists meticulously compounded herbal remedies and dispensed them to patients, often collaborating closely with physicians. While some herbs, such as fennel and mint, possessed genuine medicinal properties, others were based on superstition or folklore. For instance, mandre root was believed to cure ailments ranging from impotence to demonic possession, despite its extreme toxicity. One of the most enduring and misguided beliefs in medieval medicine was the miasma theory, which posited that disease was transmitted through foul-smelling air. Consequently, people resorted to carrying sweet-smelling posies or wearing elaborate beak-like masks filled with aromatic herbs to ward off this supposedly harmful air. Although these measures offered little to prevent the spread of illness, they were widely adopted during times of plague and pestilence. As the barber surgeon packed up his tools and prepared to move on to the next town, he couldn't help but reflect on the limitations of his craft. Despite his best efforts, he understood that many of his patients would not survive their illnesses. It was a stark reality of life in the Middle Ages, where death was an ever-present threat. Yet, even in the face of such grim prospects, the barber surgeon and his contemporaries persevered, dedicating themselves to alleviating suffering and extending life. While their methods may have been misguided, their intentions were often pure. In an era when the mysteries of the human body were largely unknown, they represented the best hope for those afflicted by disease and injury. As we examine the medical practices of the Middle Ages from our modern perspective, it's easy to dismiss them as primitive or even barbaric. However, it's essential to remember that these healers were operating within the confines of their time, utilizing the knowledge and tools available to them. Medieval healers, despite their limited knowledge and assumptions, were pioneers who laid the groundwork for evidence-based medicine. Their tireless work, often at great personal risk, sowed the seeds of progress that would revolutionize our understanding of health and disease in the centuries that followed. Advances in anatomy, physiology, and microbiology transformed our perception of health and disease. However, it was the work of these medieval healers who paved the way for these breakthroughs. As we journey through medieval history, let us remember the barber surgeons, apothecaries, and monastic healers who came before us. They may not have had all the answers, but they asked the right questions and set us on the path to greater understanding. The road ahead was fraught with peril. Endemic diseases ravaged medieval populations, striking down rich and poor alike. Dysentery, a painful and often fatal infection of the digestive system, was rampant in unsanitary conditions. Caused by contaminated food or water, it could quickly spread through communities, leaving a trail of suffering and loss. Typhoid fever, another waterborne illness, was equally devastating. Transmitted by the feces of infected individuals, it could devastate households in a matter of days. The high fever, rash, and delirium it caused immense anguish for those who witnessed their loved ones succumb to its ravages. Smallpox, a highly contagious viral disease, was one of the most feared scourges of the Middle Ages. Its victims were left covered in painful, oozing blisters that often resulted in permanent scarring or blindness. In an era before vaccination, countless lives were claimed by diseases that ravaged entire villages. Tuberculosis, a bacterial infection primarily affecting the lungs, was another endemic killer. Its slow, wasting course could drag on for years, leaving sufferers emaciated and coughing up blood. In the close quarters of medieval households, it could easily spread from person to person, decimating entire families. The impact of these diseases was felt at every level of society, from the lowliest peasant to the highest king. Armies were weakened by dysentery and typhoid, leaving them vulnerable to defeat on the battlefield. Kingdoms were left reeling by the loss of key leaders and the economic devastation wrought by widespread illness. Perhaps the greatest toll was exacted on the common folk whose daily lives were a constant struggle against disease and deprivation. For them, the threat of illness was compounded by chronic malnutrition and the ever-present specter of famine. When crops failed or wars disrupted food supplies, the weakened populace was left even more vulnerable to the ravages of endemic diseases. This vicious cycle played out again and again in medieval Europe. A bad harvest could lead to widespread hunger, which in turn could weaken the immune systems of entire communities. This left them more susceptible to diseases like tuberculosis and smallpox, which could then spread like wildfire through the malnourished population. The result was a cascade of suffering and death that could take years to recover from. For the average medieval family, this meant living in a constant state of anxiety and grief. They might lose a child to dysentery one year, a parent to tuberculosis the next. The spectre of disease was always lurking, ready to strike down the young and old alike. And in a world without modern medicine or social safety nets, the loss of a breadwinner could spell ruin for an entire household. Even amidst such relentless tragedy, medieval communities found ways to persevere. In times of crisis, they banded together, sharing their meager resources and tending to the sick and dying as best they could. They sought solace in their faith, praying for deliverance from the scourges that plagued them. Gradually, painfully, they began to develop the knowledge and practices that would eventually lead to improved health and longer lives. Advances in hygiene and sanitation emerged from the Islamic world, along with a greater emphasis on empirical observation and experimentation. In Europe, the rise of universities and the rediscovery of ancient medical texts laid the foundation for a more scientific approach to healing. However, progress was slow and uneven, and for the vast majority of medieval people, life remained harsh, brutish, and short. They lived and died at the mercy of forces beyond their control, from microscopic pathogens that ravaged their bodies to the social and economic systems that kept them mired in poverty and squalor. Reflecting on this grim chapter in human history, it's easy to feel a sense of hopelessness and despair. Yet we must also remember the incredible resilience and tenacity of the human spirit that allowed medieval people to endure unimaginable hardships and persevere in the face of overwhelming odds. Their story is one of struggle and survival, of loss and renewal. While we now live in a world of antibiotics and vaccines, we are still not immune to the forces of disease and death. We would do well to learn from the lessons of our medieval ancestors who faced the spectre of illness with courage, compassion, and an unwavering will to persevere. In our modern age, with all its technological marvels and medical breakthroughs, it's easy to forget just how far we've come. We take for granted the antibiotics that can cure a life-threatening infection with a few pills, and the vaccines that have eradicated smallpox and polio. The sanitation systems that ensure clean water and livable cities are unimaginable luxuries for people living in medieval Europe. In their world, even minor cuts could lead to fatal sepsis. Childbirth was a harrowing ordeal that claimed countless lives, and a simple bout of diarrhea could be fatal for the frail or elderly. Faced with such overwhelming odds, they turned to their faith and community for comfort and hope. Religion played a central role in medieval life, offering spiritual solace and practical aid during crises. Monasteries and convents functioned as hospitals and hospices, providing care for the sick and dying when no one else would. Pilgrimage sites like the Shrine of Thomas Becket in Canterbury and the relics of the True Cross in Jerusalem attracted desperate supplicants seeking miraculous cures or divine intervention. While the power of prayer and faith healing may seem like superstition to modern minds, for medieval people, they were a vital lifeline in a world where medicine offered little. However, even the most devout could not escape the grim realities of life in the Middle Ages. The Black Death, which struck in the 14th century, claimed up to half the population of Europe. Many saw it as a divine punishment for humanity's sins. Some resorted to extreme acts of penance, like the flagellants who roamed the countryside, whipping themselves into a bloody frenzy. Others sought scapegoats, lashing out at marginalized groups like Jews and lepers, who were often blamed for spreading disease. The persecution of witches, which reached its peak in the early modern period, had its roots in the fear and superstition of the Middle Ages. Any misfortune was attributed to malevolent spells and demonic influence. Amidst the backdrop of religious fervor and existential dread, there were glimmers of hope and progress. The Islamic world, with its advanced system of hospitals and emphasis on empirical observation, made significant strides in medical knowledge. During the Middle Ages, scholars like Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, and Al-Razi Rhazes made groundbreaking contributions to the understanding of anatomy, physiology, and disease. In Europe, the establishment of medical schools like the one in Seno, Italy, marked a tentative step towards a more scientific approach to healing. Here, students learned not only from ancient texts, but also from hands-on experience with patients, dissecting cadavers to gain a better understanding of the human body. However, even these early pioneers were limited by the prevailing beliefs and superstitions of their time. The theory of the four humours, which held that health was a balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, remained dominant throughout the Middle Ages and beyond. Treatments like bloodletting and purging were still widely practiced, even as some began to question their efficacy. Herbal remedies, too, were a mainstay of medieval medicine, with monks and nuns cultivating extensive gardens of medicinal plants. Some of these, like foxglove, used to treat heart conditions, and willowbark, a natural source of aspirin, have since been validated by modern science. Others, like the belief in the healing power of unicorn horns and powdered mummies, have been consigned to the dustbin of history. As we examine the medical lore of the Middle Ages, it's tempting to dismiss it all as mere quackery and superstition. But to do so would be to overlook the very real suffering and courage of the people who lived and died during that time. They may not have possessed the knowledge or tools we have today, but they faced the spectre of illness and death with a fortitude and resilience that is truly humbling. In their stories, we can find echoes of our own struggles and triumphs. We may no longer fear the Black Death or rely on leeches and bloodletting, but we still face the challenges of disease, the limits of our knowledge, and the ever-present reality of our mortality. As we look to the future of medicine, with its promise of gene therapies and personalized treatments, we should remember the hard lessons of the past. We stand on the shoulders of giants, from the barber surgeons and apothecaries of the Middle Ages to the scientists and physicians of today. Their legacy is one of perseverance in the face of adversity and hope in the darkest of times. It reminds us that even in the midst of suffering and loss, the human spirit endures, ever seeking new ways to heal, comfort, and carry on. Let us honor the memory of those who came before us and strive to build upon their work with compassion, humility, and an unwavering commitment to alleviating human suffering. After all, that is the true measure of our progress as a species and the ultimate goal of all our endeavors. As we conclude our journey through the annals of medieval medicine, we find ourselves back in the village where it all began. Years after the devastation of the Black Death, the once bustling streets are quieter now, the faces of the survivors etched with the lines of grief and hardship. However, there are also signs of hope and renewal. The local lord, having lost his own family to the plague, has ordered the construction of a new well and a system of gutters to carry away waste and rainwater. The monks at the nearby abbey have taken to burning aromatic herbs in the streets, hoping to purify the air and ward off miasmas. In the marketplace, a new apothecary has set up shop, offering an array of tonics and tinctures made from exotic spices and locally grown herbs. He claims to have studied with the great Ibn Sina himself, and his remedies are said to have saved many lives during the recent outbreak of dysentery. The barber surgeon, too, has adapted to the changing times. He now boasts a collection of finely crafted surgical instruments imported from the great cities of Italy and the Islamic world. He has even taken on an apprentice, a bright young man with a keen eye and a steady hand. These may seem like minor changes in the grand scheme of things, but they represent a glimmer of progress in a world that has known so much darkness. They are a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit, which refuses to be defeated by even the greatest of adversities. As we leave this medieval village, we can't help but reflect on how far we've come since those grim and uncertain times. We live in an age of antibiotics and anesthesia, of organ transplants and stem cell therapies. We have eradicated smallpox and polio and are on the cusp of defeating malaria and HIV, but we also know that our work is far from finished. New diseases emerge every year, from SARS and Ebola to COVID-19 and whatever comes next. Drug-resistant superbugs threaten to undo a century of progress, while climate change and environmental degradation pose existential threats to human health and well-being. In the face of these challenges, we must summon the same courage and determination that saw our medieval ancestors through their darkest hours. We must be willing to question old assumptions, embrace new ideas, and work tirelessly in the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Above all, we must remember that medicine is more than just a science or a profession. It is a calling, a sacred trust that binds us to our fellow human beings in their moments of greatest need. It is a reminder that we are all in this together, that our fates are intertwined, and that none of us is truly healthy until all of us are. So, let us go forth from this place with renewed purpose and compassion. Let us honor the memory of those who suffered and died in the centuries before us. Let us strive to build a world where no one has to endure such suffering again. After all, that is the true legacy of medieval medicine and indeed of all humanity. As the barber surgeon arrived in town, his cart brimming with sharp blades, metallic tools, and mysterious tinctures, a mix of hope and unease rippled through the sickly community. In an era where medical knowledge was often intertwined with superstition and religious beliefs, these traveling healers were seen as both saviors and harbingers of suffering. The townspeople gathered around, desperate for any glimmer of relief from the relentless onslaught of disease. A frail, elderly man hobbled forward, his body racked with a persistent hacking cough that hinted at a deep-seated illness. With a grave nod, the barber surgeon gestured for the man to sit on a wooden stool. He reached for a crude lancet, its edge gleaming in the sunlight, and with a swift, practiced motion made a deep incision into the man's arm. The patient gritted his teeth, his face contorted in a mix of pain and desperate hope as dark, thick blood began to flow into a waiting bowl. Bloodletting, a cornerstone of medieval medicine, was believed to restore balance to the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. An excess or deficiency in any of these was thought to be the root cause of illness and disease. By draining excess or bad blood, practitioners hoped to restore equilibrium and promote healing. However, as we now understand, this practice often did more harm than good, weakening already frail bodies and sometimes introducing new infections through unsanitary tools. The barber surgeon moved from patient to patient, his techniques varying, but equally misguided. For a young boy suffering from a severe headache, he recommended trepation, the drilling of a hole into the skull, to release evil spirits believed to be the source of the pain. The child's mother watched in a mix of apprehension and desperate faith as the barber surgeon, wielding a crude hand drill, bore into her son's head. She silently prayed for relief. An elderly woman, her skin scarred with the telltale marks of smallpox, was prescribed a concoction of bread mold and vinegar to draw out the poisons. Although we now know that certain molds possess antibiotic properties, the haphazard application and lack of understanding often rendered such treatments ineffective at best. As the day progressed, the barber surgeon's cart gradually emptied of its gruesome array of bloodied bowls and soiled rags. The town square buzzed with a mix of excitement and fear. Some claimed to feel invigorated by their treatments, while others were already experiencing the onset of new fevers and infections. In the days that followed, some would recover, their resilient bodies fighting off illness despite the dubious interventions. Others would succumb, their weakened states exacerbated by the very treatments meant to heal them. Such was the precarious nature of life and death in the face of medieval medicine. As night fell, the barber surgeon packed up his wares and prepared to move on to the next town, leaving behind a trail of blood, hope, and sorrow. For the villagers, the spectre of illness remained an ever-present threat. Their faith in God and the promise of relief through suffering were their only solace in a world where the true causes of disease remained shrouded in mystery. Amidst the patchwork fields and dense primeval forests, another town came into view. Its thatched roofs and dirt paths were so similar to those just left behind. Here, too, the familiar telltale signs of endemic diseases were etched upon the faces of the weary inhabitants. A young mother cradled her feverish child, the little one's face flushed and slick with sweat. The woman's own eyes were hollowed by exhaustion and grief, having already lost 2 children to the relentless grip of dysentery the previous summer. The child's belly was swollen and distended, racked with cramps as the infection ravaged their small body. Nearby, an elderly man sat slumped against the wall of his small hovel, his breath rattling in his chest with each labored inhalation. The telltale bloody cough and wasting frame spoke of the consumption that had claimed so many lives, the disease we now know as tuberculosis. In the fields beyond, a group of laborers toiled under the scorching sun, their bodies thin and weakened by the constant threat of malnutrition. The meager harvests and periodic famines left them vulnerable to the onslaught of illnesses, their immune systems compromised by the lack of nourishment. The people of this town, like so many others across the medieval world, lived in the constant shadow of death and disease. The names and faces might change from village to village, but the stories remained hauntingly similar: lives cut short, families torn apart, and communities struggling to carry on in the face of unrelenting tragedy. For the wealthy and powerful, there was some measure of respite. Castles and fortified mansions offered a degree of separation from the squalor and filth of the common folk, providing their inhabitants with slightly better nutrition and living conditions. Yet even they were not immune to the ravages of illness, as the period of plague and disease among the royal courts of Europe could attest. In the monasteries and convents that dotted the landscape, a different kind of battle against illness was being waged. The sick and dying were often tended to by monks and nuns who saw it as their holy duty to offer comfort and care to the afflicted. The infirmaries of these religious institutions were often the closest thing to a hospital that many people would ever know. Herbal remedies and careful nursing provided some small measure of relief. Even if the underlying causes of disease remained a mystery, the spectre of illness and death loomed large within the cloistered walls of the monastery. Many young novices succumbed to the same diseases that ravaged the outside world, their lives cut short before they could take their final vows. As the barber surgeon arrived in this new town, setting up his temporary stall in the market square, the cycle of hope and despair began anew. The people here, like those in countless other villages, were desperate for any glimmer of relief, any chance to stave off the grim reaper for a little while longer. They came, the sick and the suffering, the young and the old, placing their trust in the crude tools and unproven remedies of the traveling healer. Some found temporary respite from their ailments, their faith in the power of medicine bolstered for a time. Others, weakened by the very treatments meant to save them, succumbed to the ravages of infection and disease, their bodies adding to the growing toll of medieval life. It was a never-ending dance of life and death, played out against the backdrop of a world still shrouded in the mysteries of the human body and the forces that sought to destroy it. As the barber surgeon packed up his cart once more, ready to move on to the next town, the cycle of hope and despair continued unabated. For the people of this village, as for so many others, the fight against illness and disease was a constant companion, a battle that would be waged for generations to come. The road stretched out ahead, a ribbon of dust and dirt winding its way through the lush green countryside. The barber surgeon urged his horse forward, the cart creaking and swaying with the weight of his tools and remedies. In the distance, the spires of a grand cathedral pierced the sky, a testament to the faith and devotion of the people who lived and died in its shadow. For many, the promise of salvation in the afterlife was the sole solace in a world perpetually plagued by pain and suffering. As the barber surgeon approached the outskirts of the next town, he could already discern the unmistakable signs of illness and disease. A group of peasants, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow, huddled around a small fire, seeking warmth and comfort in the face of their afflictions. An elderly woman, her skin mottled with the telltale rash of typhoid fever, lay shivering on a bed of straw. Her family gathered around her in a vigil of prayer and helplessness. A young boy, his body racked with the convulsions of epilepsy, thrashed and moaned as his mother desperately attempted to soothe him. These were the sights and sounds of medieval life, a world where the spectre of illness and death loomed ever present. For the people of this era, the promise of relief through prayer, pilgrimage, holy relics and sacred rituals often served as their only hope. The barber surgeon set up his stall in the town square, his arrival met with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The people here, like those in countless other places, were desperate for any respite from their suffering, any glimmer of hope in a world so often shrouded in darkness. As the first patient took their place on the wooden bench, the barber surgeon reached for his tools, his mind already racing with the potential diagnoses and treatments. Was it an excess of black bile that required purging, a demonic possession that demanded the application of holy water and prayer? He would do his best, applying the knowledge and skill passed down through generations of healers, even as the true causes of illness remained shrouded in mystery. In a world where the secrets of the human body were still locked away, where the microscopic agents of disease were yet unknown, he could only hope that his efforts would bring some small measure of relief to those who suffered. As the day unfolded, and patients came and went, the barber surgeon couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness in the face of so much pain and suffering. For every life he saved and ailment he managed to alleviate, countless others slipped away, their bodies ravaged by forces beyond his comprehension or control. Yet he persevered, driven by a sense of duty and a belief in the power of healing, no matter how limited or misguided it might be. In a world where life was often cut short and death lurked around every corner, he would do his best to ease the suffering of those who crossed his path. As the sun began to set over the medieval town, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets and thatched roofs, the barber-surgeon packed up his tools and prepared to move on once more. The road ahead was long and uncertain, with challenges that seemed as daunting as ever. But for now, he could take solace in the knowledge that he had made a difference, however small, in the lives of those he had treated. In a world often filled with darkness and despair, that glimmer of hope and humanity was a precious thing indeed. As he drove his cart out of town, the barber-surgeon couldn't help but reflect on the state of medicine in his time. The theories and practices that guided his work, handed down through generations of healers, seemed inadequate in the face of the vast array of diseases and afflictions that plagued the people of the medieval world. The miasma theory, which held that disease was caused by foul-smelling air, still held sway among many practitioners. The belief that the alignment of the stars and planets could influence health and well-being was also widespread, leading some to seek the advice of astrologers and soothsayers in times of illness. Even the role of apothecaries, with their vast arrays of herbs, tinctures, and potions, was often more steeped in superstition than in any real understanding of the human body and its workings. In a world plagued by the constant threat of disease and death, people sought every possible means to ward off these ever-present dangers. Among the various methods employed, charms, amulets, and other mystical objects held a special place in the hearts of many. However, amidst this ignorance and misunderstanding, glimmers of progress and enlightenment emerged. In the Islamic world, scholars like Ibn Sina made significant strides in the study of medicine. They laid the foundation for a more scientific approach to healing, challenging the prevailing beliefs and paving the way for a new era of medical knowledge. The establishment of medical schools, such as the one in Salerno, Italy, further contributed to this progress by providing a formalized system of education and training for aspiring healers. The works of ancient physicians like Galen and Hippocrates were rediscovered and studied anew, shedding light on the workings of the human body that had been lost for centuries. These discoveries offered valuable insights into the complexities of the human body and paved the way for further advancements in medicine. Despite these remarkable advancements, the reality of life for the barber-surgeon and the vast majority of people living in the medieval world remained challenging. They faced constant struggles against the ravages of disease and relied on the skills of traveling healers and the power of prayer for hope and relief. As the barber-surgeon embarked on his journey down the winding road, he carried with him a sense of purpose and determination. He hoped that his efforts, however small and imperfect, were making a difference in the lives of those he encountered. He believed that the knowledge and skills he passed on to his apprentices would eventually contribute to building a better, healthier world for all. The journey ahead was long and uncertain, filled with numerous challenges and daunting obstacles. Yet with each village visited and each patient treated, the barber-surgeon felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose. He understood that he was playing a vital role in the grand tapestry of human history, a history marked by suffering and sorrow, but also by hope, resilience, and an unquenchable desire to heal and be healed. Undeterred by the burdens of his calling, the barber-surgeon pressed on, his cart creaking and swaying beneath the weight of his tools and remedies. His heart was heavy with the weight of his responsibilities, but he was driven by a sense of purpose and a belief in the transformative power of knowledge and healing. The road stretched out before him, a ribbon of dust and promise, leading ever onward into the unknown, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who dared to seek a better world. Amidst the pervasive misery of disease in a small German village, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. The village elders, having observed the detrimental effects of filth and poor sanitation on the spread of illness, implemented rudimentary public health measures. Crude gutters were dug to channel waste away from living quarters, and villagers were encouraged to keep their animals separate from their homes. The local monastery also emphasized the importance of hand-washing and cleanliness among its brothers, a practice that gradually spread to the lay community. These simple yet significant steps marked a critical shift in thinking, moving away from reliance on divine intervention or mystical cures of traveling healers towards practical measures to prevent disease. While it was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, a tiny spark of light in the vast darkness of medieval ignorance and superstition, it was a start, a foundation upon which future generations would build. As the years passed and the barber surgeon continued his travels, he noticed subtle changes in the villages he visited. More communities embraced basic hygiene and sanitation, their streets cleaner and their air fresher. It was a slow and halting progress, often met with resistance and skepticism from those clinging to the old ways, but it was progress nonetheless, a sign that the long and arduous journey towards a healthier, more enlightened world was finally beginning. For the barber surgeon, these changes brought a sense of both hope and melancholy. He could envision a better future, a world where disease might be tamed by the power of knowledge and reason, but he also knew that he would not live to witness that future himself. His own journey was nearing its end. His body, weakened by the numerous trials and hardships of his long and arduous life, bore the weight of his years of service. As he reflected on his journey, the countless lives he had touched, the suffering he had witnessed and endeavored to alleviate, a profound sense of both pride and humility washed over him. Despite the overwhelming ignorance and despair that surrounded him, he had given his all to the cause of healing. Now, as he prepared to pass on his knowledge and tools to a new generation of healers, he could only hope that they would carry forward his work, building upon the modest yet crucial foundation he and others like him had laid. The road ahead was fraught with challenges and uncertainties, but with each passing year, each small victory against the darkness of disease, the world was gradually moving towards a brighter and healthier future. And so, the barber surgeon, his journey drawing to a close, could rest easy in the knowledge that he had played his part, however small, in the grand and ongoing struggle for life and health in the face of the unknown. The scene fades, the clatter of the horse-drawn cart receding into the distance as we return to the present day. The world we inhabit now, with its advanced medical knowledge, hospitals and clinics, antibiotics and vaccines, stands in stark contrast to the dark and uncertain times of the medieval barber surgeon. Yet, as we reflect on our progress, it is equally important to remember how much further we still have to go. Even with all our modern advancements, disease and illness persist as constant threats, a poignant reminder of our own fragility and the limits of our understanding. In many parts of the world, people still live and die in conditions that are not so different from those of the medieval peasant. Their lives are plagued by poverty, malnutrition, and a lack of access to basic healthcare. Even in the most developed nations, the specter of pandemics, chronic illness, and health disparities looms large. As we drift off to sleep, our minds filled with the vivid images and stories of a distant and challenging past, let us not forget the ongoing challenges that await us. The journey towards a world of genuine health and well-being for all is far from complete. It will require the unwavering efforts and dedication of countless healers, researchers, and ordinary people to achieve this goal. Just as the medieval barber surgeon found hope and purpose in his calling, despite the overwhelming odds, so too can we draw strength and inspiration from the knowledge that we are part of a grand and continuous struggle. This struggle is one of alleviating suffering, fostering understanding, and building a better, healthier world. The arrival of the barber surgeon brought a mix of hope and apprehension to the town. On one hand, people were desperate for any form of medical aid in the face of widespread suffering and loss. The mere presence of someone claiming to possess healing skills lifted their spirits. However, there was also an undercurrent of unease. Barber surgeons had a reputation for causing more harm than good due to their crude and painful treatments. As the barber surgeon set up his makeshift practice in the town square, a queue of townsfolk quickly formed, each eagerly waiting their turn to be seen. Many were there out of sheer desperation, willing to try anything to alleviate their loved ones' suffering. Others sought treatment for more common complaints like toothaches or persistent headaches. Little did they know that even routine procedures could be perilous in the hands of an untrained medieval practitioner. The barber surgeon worked with swift, practiced motions, his razor-sharp blades flashing in the sunlight. One of his favorite treatments was bloodletting, the practice of draining excess or bad blood from the body in an attempt to restore balance. He claimed it could cure everything from fevers to melancholy. In reality, it only weakened the already frail and ill, sometimes sending them into shock from blood loss. In medieval times, barber surgeons were often the only medical professionals available to the general public. Despite the barbaric nature of their treatments, they were a lifeline for those who fell ill. Barber surgeons believed that leeches could suck out disease and apply them to patients' skin to engorge themselves on blood. However, removing the leeches often caused further bleeding and left patients with painful, itchy wounds. For those suffering from mental afflictions, barber surgeons might attempt trepanation, the practice of drilling holes into the skull. They believed that this would release evil spirits or alleviate pressure on the brain. In reality, trepanation often led to infection, brain damage, and death. As word of the barber surgeon's presence spread, more and more desperate townsfolk arrived seeking their services. Some walked away feeling relieved, convinced that the painful treatments had done some good. Others weren't so lucky. Over the coming days and weeks, many of those who had been bled or leeched took a turn for the worse, growing weaker and more feverish. For some, a visit to the barber surgeon would be their last. This grim reminder of the harsh realities of life in the Middle Ages highlights the desperation of people during that time. In a world where even a simple cut could lead to a deadly infection and diseases like the plague could wipe out entire communities, people were willing to try anything for a chance at survival. The barber surgeon, armed with crude tools and misguided theories, offered a glimmer of hope in a world plagued by fear and suffering. However, the unfortunate reality is that medieval medicine often caused more harm than good. Without a clear understanding of disease causes, healers resorted to blind guessing at cures, often exacerbating the situation. It would take centuries for the scientific method and evidence-based medicine to replace superstition and tradition. In the meantime, countless lives were lost to treatable illnesses due to well-meaning yet ultimately deadly treatments. As the barber surgeon packed up his tools and moved on to the next town, the village grappled with the aftermath of his visit. Some individuals recovered from their crude treatments, counting themselves fortunate. Others succumbed to infection or blood loss, leaving behind grieving families and a profound sense of helplessness. This scenario played out repeatedly across medieval Europe, a testament to the remarkable resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. For those who endured it, the specter of illness and death was an ever-present companion, shaping every facet of medieval life, from religious beliefs to social structures. In a world where death was a constant threat, people clung to faith, superstition, and the desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, they might survive. It's a mindset difficult to comprehend from the comfort and safety of the modern world. Yet even today, with all our medical advancements and scientific knowledge, we are not invincible. The COVID-19 pandemic serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of our grip on health and life. It echoes the fear and uncertainty that gripped medieval communities during times of plague and pestilence. In a sense, it serves as a reminder to be grateful for the incredible progress we've made while remaining humble in the face of nature's immense power. We may have advanced significantly from the days of barber surgeons and bloodletting, yet we remain vulnerable and susceptible to forces beyond our control. This lesson was well known to our medieval ancestors, who understood the preciousness of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. As we reflect on the grim realities of medieval medicine, it's easy to feel a sense of superiority, believing that we have conquered disease and death. However, the truth is more nuanced. While we have made remarkable strides and should be proud of the advances that have saved countless lives, we must also acknowledge that we are part of an ongoing struggle against illness and suffering that has persisted for centuries. In the face of this battle, the resilience and courage of our ancestors are truly admirable and should be celebrated. They endured unimaginable hardships with grace and determination, finding hope and meaning even in the darkest of times. This legacy serves as a reminder that the human spirit can endure even in the face of great adversity. As we drift off to sleep, let us remember those who came before us, the countless souls who suffered and perished in a world without modern medicine. Let us honor their memory by cherishing the incredible gift of health and life that we have been given. And let us confront the challenges of our own time with the same resilience, courage, and hope that sustained our ancestors during the darkest days of the Middle Ages. As the barber surgeon packed up his tools and moved on to the next town, he left behind a trail of suffering and confusion. The townspeople were left to ponder the effectiveness of his treatments, many of which appeared to cause more harm than good. Bloodletting in particular sparked heated debates and raised eyebrows. The theory behind bloodletting was that it would remove the bad blood from the body, thereby restoring balance to the humors. Medieval medical practices often left patients weakened and vulnerable to further illness. The sight of a pale, listless patient with multiple cuts on their arms was all too common. Leeching, another popular treatment, often did more harm than good. The small, slimy creatures were applied to the skin in hopes of sucking out the bad blood and healing the patient. But many found the experience painful and unsettling. The loss of blood often left them feeling drained and weak. Perhaps the most frightening of all medieval medical practices was trepanning. This involved drilling a hole into the patient's skull to release evil spirits or alleviate pressure on the brain. It's hard to imagine the sheer terror that patients must have felt as they lay on the operating table, watching the barber surgeon approach with his crude drill. Despite the best efforts of medieval healers, many patients suffered greatly at their hands. The lack of proper training and understanding of the human body meant that treatments were often misguided and dangerous. It was not uncommon for patients to contract infections from unsterilized equipment or to suffer from the side effects of toxic remedies. One such patient was a young woman named Matilda. She had been suffering from a persistent cough and fever for weeks, and her family had grown desperate for a cure. They brought her to the local apothecary, who prescribed a concoction made from a variety of herbs and animal parts. Matilda dutifully drank the foul-smelling liquid, but her condition only worsened. She developed painful sores in her mouth and throat, and her fever spiked to dangerous levels. Her family watched helplessly as she writhed in agony, unable to find relief from her suffering. Stories like Matilda's were all too common in medieval times. The miasma theory, which held that disease was caused by bad air, led many people astray in their search for a cure. In medieval times, people believed that burning sweet-smelling herbs and carrying pomanders filled with perfume could ward off illness. However, they were unaware that the real culprits were the unseen microbes lurking in the filth and squalor of their lives. Monasteries and apothecaries were often seen as centers of healing. Monks and nuns cultivated medicinal herbs in their gardens and prepared remedies for the sick and suffering, believing it was their holy duty to care for the ill and serve God. Despite their well-intentioned efforts, these healers often worked with limited knowledge and resources. They relied heavily on ancient texts and traditional remedies, many of which lacked scientific basis. They also lacked the understanding of basic hygiene and sanitation that we take for granted today. Despite their best efforts, the toll of endemic diseases was staggering. Dysentery, typhoid fever, smallpox, and tuberculosis were constant threats to the population's health and well-being. These diseases would sweep through entire villages, leaving a trail of suffering and death in their wake. The symptoms of these illnesses were often horrific and painful. For instance, dysentery caused severe diarrhea and abdominal cramping, leaving victims dehydrated and weak. Smallpox, on the other hand, caused a rash of painful blisters that could leave survivors scarred for life. Families were often struck repeatedly by tragedy, losing multiple members to the same disease. It was not uncommon for parents to bury several of their children before they reached adulthood. The emotional toll of such losses was immeasurable, leaving entire communities gripped by grief and despair. The spread of endemic diseases was fueled by a perfect storm of factors. Poor sanitation and a lack of clean water allowed disease-causing microbes to easily spread from person to person. Malnutrition and famine weakened people's immune systems, making them more susceptible to illness. Medieval life, characterized by close quarters and multiple families sharing small living spaces, facilitated the rapid spread of diseases throughout households. Even those in positions of power were not immune to the ravages of disease. Armies were often weakened by outbreaks of dissension and other illnesses, leaving them vulnerable to defeat on the battlefield. Kings and queens, despite their wealth and privilege, could fall victim to the same diseases as their subjects. The story of King Richard III of England serves as a poignant example of the devastating impact endemic diseases could have on even the most powerful individuals. Richard, renowned for his military prowess and strategic mind, was ultimately undone by a simple case of dysentery. While leading his troops in battle against Henry Tudor in 1485, Richard fell ill with the disease. Despite his valiant efforts to endure the pain and discomfort, his condition worsened daily. On the morning of the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard was so debilitated by his illness that he required assistance to mount his horse. In the midst of the battle, Richard fought bravely, but his strength was no match for the disease that ravaged his body. Tragically, he was killed in combat, his body left to rot on the battlefield. This unfortunate end marked the demise of a man who had once held immense power and influence in England. The story of Richard III is just one of many instances where endemic diseases struck down even the most prominent and influential individuals in medieval society. No one was immune to the ravages of illness, and the constant threat of disease cast a long shadow over daily life. In the face of such overwhelming odds, it is understandable that many people turned to religion and superstition for solace and guidance. The power of prayer and holy relics were perceived as a last resort for those who had exhausted all other options. People would embark on pilgrimages to sacred sites, seeking cures for their ailments or carrying talismans and amulets to ward off evil spirits. However, even religion couldn't always provide the answers people desperately craved. During times of plague and widespread illness, many believed disease was a divine punishment, a sign of God's wrath and displeasure. This belief gave rise to the flagellants, groups of religious zealots who publicly whipped themselves to atone for their sins and appease God's anger. They believed that by inflicting pain upon themselves, they could absorb the world's suffering and offer it as a sacrifice. They would march through the streets, chanting prayers and hymns, their backs roaring and bleeding from the repeated lashes of the whip. But their actions often had the opposite effect. Instead of stopping the spread of disease, their public displays of penance may have actually contributed to it by gathering in large crowds and sharing contaminated whips and clothing. The belief in divine punishment also led to the scapegoating and persecution of minority groups during times of plague. Jews in particular were frequently blamed for outbreaks of disease, accused of poisoning wells and spreading illness through nefarious means. These accusations often resulted in violent attacks and pogroms against Jewish communities, with entire neighborhoods being burned to the ground and their inhabitants slaughtered. The tragedy of these attacks was compounded by the fact that they did nothing to stop the spread of disease and only served to further divide and weaken medieval society. Despite the numerous challenges and obstacles faced by medieval people in the fight against disease, there were some glimmers of hope and progress in the Islamic world. Scholars like Ibn Sina were making significant strides in medicine, building upon the knowledge of ancient Greek and Roman texts to develop innovative treatments and gain a deeper understanding of the human body. Ibn Sina's comprehensive medical treatise, written in the 11th century, became a cornerstone of medical education in the Islamic world and beyond. It provided detailed descriptions of diseases and their treatments, as well as insights into anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology. In Europe, the establishment of medical schools, such as the one in Salerno, Italy, marked a pivotal moment in the professionalization of medicine. These schools trained a new generation of doctors and surgeons equipped with the latest knowledge and techniques for diagnosing and treating illnesses and injuries. However, even with these advancements, medieval medicine still fell short of modern standards. Many treatments were based on superstition and folklore rather than scientific evidence, and even the most skilled doctors were constrained by the limited tools and technologies available to them. Despite these challenges, there were notable successes in medieval medicine. Herbal remedies, in particular, demonstrated their effectiveness in treating a wide range of ailments, from digestive issues to skin conditions. Additionally, the establishment of early hospitals, often affiliated with monasteries or religious orders, provided a sanctuary for the sick and injured, offering them care and comfort during their time of need. As we return to our plague-stricken village, years after the barber surgeon's visit, we witness signs of progress and hope amidst the prevailing sorrow and despair. The streets are cleaner now, thanks to the implementation of gutters and public sanitation systems that help control waste and prevent the spread of disease. Those who have survived the plague have learned valuable lessons about the significance of hygiene and cleanliness. They diligently maintain their homes, ensuring that they are swept and their water sources are protected, recognizing that even small actions can have a profound impact in the fight against illness. While the specter of disease still loomed large over medieval life, a sense of resilience and determination emerged among the survivors. Having witnessed the worst that illness could inflict, they emerged stronger and wiser from their struggles. From our modern vantage point, it's evident how far we've come in combating disease. The advent of vaccines, antibiotics, and other medical advancements has provided us with tools unimaginable to our medieval ancestors. However, the battle against illness is far from over. New diseases emerge annually, and old ones continue to evolve and adapt. Vigilance and dedication are essential in combating these threats, drawing lessons from the past's hard-won experiences. Reflecting on the story of disease in medieval times reminds us of life's fragility and the importance of cherishing time with loved ones. While our challenges may differ from those of our ancestors, we can still learn from their strength, resilience, and unwavering determination to survive and thrive despite adversity. As we drift off to sleep, our minds filled with tales of medieval life, we find solace in knowing we're part of a long-standing human struggle against disease and suffering. This struggle has shaped our history and our very nature as a species, and it will continue to define us for generations to come. As the barber surgeon arrived in town, his cart brimming with an array of instruments and tonics, he was met with a mix of hope and apprehension from the locals. In an era where medical knowledge was limited and often misguided, these traveling healers were viewed as both saviors and harbingers of doom. The townspeople gathered around, desperate for any relief from the myriad ailments that plagued their daily lives. The barber surgeon set up his makeshift clinic in the town square, unfurling a banner promising cures for ailments ranging from toothaches to the dreaded bubonic plague. The barber surgeon laid out his arsenal of razor-sharp blades, crude pliers, and a variety of potions and poultices. The sight was enough to make even the bravest soul quiver with fear. One by one, the sick and injured lined up to seek his aid. First in line was a young boy, his face twisted in agony. His mother explained that he had been suffering from a terrible fever and chills for days. Without hesitation, the barber surgeon reached for his fleece, a small pointed blade used for bloodletting. He proclaimed that the bad humors must be released from the body and made a quick incision on the boy's arm, allowing the blood to flow freely. The boy whimpered in pain, but his mother held him still, hoping that this ancient practice would somehow cure her son. As the day wore on, the barber surgeon treated a variety of ailments using methods that would make a modern doctor cringe. He yanked out rotten teeth with his bare hands, poured boiling oil into open wounds, and even performed the occasional trepidation, drilling a hole into the skull to release evil spirits. Yet for all his efforts, the barber surgeon's treatments often did more harm than good. Many of his patients left his clinic in worse condition than when they arrived, their bodies weakened by blood loss and infection. Some wouldn't survive the ordeal, succumbing to the very illnesses they sought to cure. This was a reflection of the state of medicine in the Middle Ages, a time when superstition and ignorance reigned supreme. The miasma theory, which held that disease was caused by foul odor, led people to carry aromatic herbs and spices to ward off illness. The belief that sickness was a punishment from God drove many to seek solace in prayer and pilgrimage rather than practical treatments. Even the most well-intentioned healers of the time, such as the monks and nuns who tended to the sick in their monasteries, were constrained by their limited understanding of the human body and the true causes of disease. They relied on ancient texts and folklore to guide their treatments, often leading to tragic outcomes. The apothecaries, with their extensive collections of herbs and spices, were regarded as the pharmacists of their era. They dispensed remedies for various ailments, from headaches to heart problems, but their concoctions were often mere placebos or, at worst, poisonous. Without any regulation or standardization, the quality and safety of their medicines varied widely. As the barber surgeon packed up his tools and moved to the next town, the villagers were left to contemplate their fate. Some would recover from their illnesses, their bodies somehow finding the strength to fight off infection and disease. Others would not be so fortunate, their lives cut short by the cruel hand of medieval medicine. For the vast majority of people in the Middle Ages, falling ill was a terrifying prospect. With no real understanding of how diseases spread or how to effectively treat them, they were at the mercy of chance and the dubious skills of the healers of the time. It was a world where a simple cut could turn deadly and a fever could signal the end of a life. Yet even in the midst of such darkness, there were glimmers of hope. In the Islamic world, scholars like Ibn Sina were making groundbreaking discoveries in anatomy and physiology, laying the foundation for modern medicine. In Europe, the establishment of early medical schools like the one in Salerno, Italy, hinted at a brighter future. However, for the common folk of the Middle Ages, these advances were still centuries away. They lived and died by the old ways, constantly battling the unseen forces of disease and decay. It was a time when getting sick meant facing the very real possibility of death. In a world teeming with peril and uncertainty, a fate that seemed almost predestined unfolded. As we reflect on this somber chapter in human history, we can't help but express gratitude for the medical knowledge and resources we possess today. We take for granted the antibiotics, vaccines, and surgical techniques that have saved countless lives and revolutionized the treatment of illnesses and injuries. Yet despite our progress, we remain vulnerable to the forces of nature and the inherent frailties of the human body. The COVID-19 pandemic serves as a stark reminder of this reality, pulling us back to a time when a single virus could devastate the world. In a sense, the story of medieval medicine serves as a cautionary tale, a testament to our achievements and the knowledge we still seek to acquire. It's a narrative of human resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity, of the unwavering pursuit of healing and hope, even in the darkest of times. As we drift off to sleep, let us envision a future where the scourges of disease and suffering are mere echoes of the past, where the wisdom of the ancients merges with the knowledge of the present to create a world of health and harmony. For in the end, the story of medicine is the story of all of us, a tale of trial and error, tragedy and triumph, an unending quest to unravel the mysteries of life itself. In the heart of the bustling city of Isfahan, nestled in what is now modern-day Iran, a renowned scholar, known to the West as Avicenna, immersed himself in ancient medical texts late into the night. The flickering candlelight illuminated the stacks of parchment and vellum, casting mesmerizing shadows on the walls of his study. This was no ordinary individual. He was the great polymath Ibn Sina, whose brilliance had already made groundbreaking contributions to philosophy, astronomy, and natural sciences. However, it was his work in the field of medicine that would etch his name indelibly into the annals of history. As a young man, he immersed himself in the works of Greek and Roman physicians like Galen and Hippocrates, as well as the accumulated knowledge of scholars during the Islamic Golden Age. Driven by a desire to synthesize and expand upon their wisdom, he embarked on a monumental endeavor, crafting his magnum opus, the Al-Qanun Falib, or the Canon of Medicine. Night after night, Ibn Sina meticulously documented his observations on human anatomy, physiology, and the nature of disease. His descriptions of symptoms and the progression of maladies such as meningitis, diabetes, and even cancer were remarkably accurate. However, his work transcended mere description. Ibn Sina pioneered a holistic approach to medicine, considering the overall health, environment, and lifestyle of his patients. He placed a strong emphasis on preventative care, nutrition, and even mental well-being, concepts that would later gain widespread acceptance in Europe centuries later. Ibn Sina's canon meticulously organized medical knowledge into a coherent system, classifying diseases based on their causes and affected organs. It provided detailed guidelines for diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment, utilizing both herbal remedies and surgical techniques. News of Ibn Sina's groundbreaking work gradually spread westward along the Silk Road trade routes. In the 12th century, the canon was translated into Latin and became a mandatory reading material at prominent European universities. Scholars and physicians alike were astounded by the depth and breadth of medical knowledge contained within its pages. The influence of Ibn Sina's canon on medieval medicine cannot be overstated. It introduced revolutionary concepts such as quarantine to control the spread of infectious diseases and the use of anesthetics during surgery. Ibn Sina's meticulous documentation of pharmacological substances and their effects laid the foundation for the development of medicinal chemistry. His unwavering commitment to clinical observation and empirical evidence steered medical practice away from superstition and towards a more scientific approach. Of course, Ibn Sina's work was not devoid of flaws or detractors. Some of his theories, such as the concept of humors governing human health, would eventually be disproven. Additionally, the canon's intricate and encyclopedic nature may have hindered original research in certain areas. Nevertheless, its profound impact as a foundation for medical education and a bridge between ancient and modern medicine is undeniable. As the candle flickered in the renowned physician's study, Ibn Sina leaned back and reflected on his monumental endeavor. The canon was a labor of love, the culmination of a lifetime of learning and unwavering dedication to the art of healing. Little did he anticipate that his work would endure for centuries, shaping the course of medicine across continents and cultures. While Europe remained steeped in superstition and primitive practices, the Islamic world continued to push the boundaries of medical knowledge. In the cosmopolitan city of Baghdad, the great Abbasid Khair al-Rashid had established the House of Wisdom, a library and center of learning that attracted scholars from all corners of the known world. Here, translators diligently worked to translate the wisdom of the Greeks, Persians, and Indians into Arabic, preserving and building upon the scientific heritage of the ancients. Among the distinguished physicians who graced the halls of the House of Wisdom was Al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes. A man of insatiable curiosity and prodigious talent, Al-Razi made groundbreaking contributions to diverse fields such as chemistry, philosophy, and medicine. He was among the first to accurately describe the symptoms of smallpox and measles and propose that these diseases were caused by specific agents that invaded the human body. Al-Razi's most enduring work, however, was his Kitab Balhawi, or Comprehensive Book of Medicine. This massive tome meticulously compiled Al-Razi's own clinical observations with extensive excerpts from earlier medical texts. It provided detailed descriptions of diseases, their causes and symptoms, as well as therapeutic recommendations ranging from diuretics to surgery. Al-Raz, like Ibn Sina's canon, was a true innovator who approached medicine with a critical and empirical eye. His comprehensive book, translated into Latin as the Liber Continens, shaped European medical practice well into the Renaissance era. Al-Razi's emphasis on direct clinical experience and willingness to challenge received wisdom set the stage for the scientific revolution that would transform medicine centuries later. As the golden age of Islamic science waned, its legacy lived on in the works of scholars like Ibn Sina and Al-Razi. Their writings preserved the flickering flame of classical learning through the long centuries of the medieval period. When Europe began to awaken from its intellectual slumber, it turned to the light of this knowledge. The great medical schools of Salerno and Méliès required the canon and the Liber Continens as mandatory reading for aspiring physicians. The Arabic texts were painstakingly translated into Latin, and their secrets gradually unraveled and absorbed into the Western tradition. The Islamic world's emphasis on empiricism, observation, and rationality slowly began to take root in European soil. Of course, progress was halting and uneven. For every enlightened scholar who looked to the works of Ibn Sina and Al-Razi for guidance, there were scores of quacks and charlatans, peddling superstitious remedies. The specter of religious dogma and the weight of centuries of tradition still held sway over much of medieval medicine. But the seeds had been planted. The remarkable contributions of the great Islamic physicians laid the groundwork for a novel medical paradigm, one grounded in reason and evidence rather than blind faith. It would take centuries for these ideas to fully flourish. While the scientific method underwent refinement, the path had been illuminated by the brilliant minds of the medieval Islamic world. As we reflect on this pivotal era from the vantage point of our contemporary age, it's easy to focus on the darkness and ignorance that characterized much of medieval life. The plundered villages, the desperate superstitions, and the cruel and misguided treatments stand out as stark reminders of the era's challenges. However, amidst this bleak landscape, there were glimmers of light, flashes of brilliance that pointed the way to a brighter future. In the pages of the canon and the comprehensive books, in the lecture halls of Salerno and the libraries of Baghdad, a quiet revolution was unfolding. This was a revolution of the mind, a gradual yet inexorable shift toward a new way of perceiving the world and our place within it. A world where reason could triumph over superstition, where the mysteries of the human body might one day be unraveled through patient study and meticulous observation. We are the inheritors of this legacy, the beneficiaries of the tireless efforts of scholars like Ibn Sina and Al-Razi. Every time we visit a doctor's office or take a prescribed medication, we draw upon the wisdom and ingenuity of these medieval pioneers. Their stories serve as a testament to the enduring human spirit, reminding us that the quest for knowledge and understanding can never be fully extinguished. Therefore, let us pause for a moment to remember these unsung heroes of medieval medicine. Let us honor their achievements and sacrifices, their unwavering commitment to the art of healing, and let us carry forward their legacy, striving relentlessly to expand the boundaries of what is possible, to illuminate the path for those who will follow in our footsteps. In the end, the story of medieval medicine is a tale of hope and resilience, showcasing the enduring power of human intellect to conquer even the darkest challenges. It serves as a reminder that amidst unimaginable suffering and loss, there are always those who rise to fight for a better tomorrow. Let us never forget their example and strive to be worthy of their legacy. As the Islamic world made strides in medical knowledge, similar progress could be observed in Europe's medieval universities. The medical school at Salerno, established in the 9th century, emerged as a renowned center of learning. Students from across Europe flocked to this coastal town in southern Italy, eager to immerse themselves in the healing arts. What set the Salerno school apart was its unique approach of welcoming both male and female students. Among them was Troa of Salerno, one of the earliest known female physicians. Her contributions to medical knowledge were profound, as her writings on women's health issues gained widespread circulation and significantly influenced medical practice for centuries. The curriculum at Salerno was heavily influenced by the works of ancient Greek and Roman physicians like Hippocrates and Galen. Students diligently studied these classic texts, memorizing the humoral theory of medicine and understanding the importance of diet, exercise, and hygiene in maintaining health. However, they also gained practical experience by observing their professors' patient treatments and even performing surgeries themselves. This hands-on approach to medical education marked a departure from the purely theoretical learning prevalent in most medieval universities. The Salerno school also boasted a medicinal garden where students could explore the healing properties of various plants and herbs. The knowledge of botanical remedies was an integral part of medieval medicine, and the understanding of which plants could cure which ailments was passed down through generations. One notable remedy was the use of willow bark to alleviate pain and fever. The active ingredient in willow bark, salicin, would later be synthesized to create aspirin, one of the most widely used drugs in the modern world. However, other herbal remedies were less effective and some were even dangerous. For instance, mandre root, used as a sedative and pain reliever, could cause hallucinations, coma, and even death if the dosage was too high. Despite these risks, medicinal plants were often the only treatment available to medieval people. In a time before antibiotics and modern pharmaceuticals, herbs and natural remedies offered a glimmer of hope in the face of illness and disease. As the medical school at Sino gained renown, other universities began to establish their own medical faculties. The University of Méliès in France, founded in the 12th century, became another important center of medical learning. Here, students learned anatomy by dissecting pigs, as human dissection was still forbidden by the Church. They also studied the works of Arab physicians like Ibn Sina and Al-Razi, whose writings had been translated into Latin and were beginning to circulate in Europe. These small advances in medical education and knowledge offered a glimmer of hope in the often bleak landscape of medieval healthcare. However, for the vast majority of people, life remained a constant struggle against illness and premature death. As we come to the end of our journey through the history of medicine in medieval times, we return to that small village where our story began. Years have passed since the plague first struck, claiming the lives of so many. The village has changed in small but significant ways. The streets are cleaner now, with gutters to carry away waste and filth. The local monastery has established a small hospital where the sick can come to receive care and comfort in their final days. But the spectre of illness and death still looms large over everyday life. Children still succumb to diseases like dysentery and smallpox, while adults are often carried away by tuberculosis and other endemic illnesses. The life expectancy remains alarmingly low, with few individuals reaching the age of 50. Despite these hardships, there's a remarkable resilience and determination among the survivors. They diligently tend to their fields and families, finding moments of joy and laughter amidst the challenges. They honor those they've lost and hold on to the hope that things will improve someday. Reflecting on the medical practices of the medieval era, it's easy to feel a sense of superiority from our modern perspective. We possess antibiotics and vaccines, X-rays and MRIs, sterile surgical techniques, and potent pain medications. However, we also face new challenges such as chronic diseases, antibiotic-resistant superbugs, and the ever-present threat of global pandemics. While we've made significant progress, we're still grappling with the same fundamental questions that confronted our medieval ancestors: how to alleviate suffering, prolong life, and find meaning and purpose in the face of our own mortality. Perhaps the most profound lesson we can draw from the history of medieval medicine is one of humility and compassion. We all share the vulnerability to illness and disease, and we all deserve access to the best possible care and treatment, regardless of our social status. Let us honor the memory of those who came before us, the healers and the sufferers, the heroes and the victims, and let us strive towards a future where good health is a fundamental right, not a privilege. If you found this extended exploration of history helpful, please consider expressing your appreciation with a like and subscribing. Your interest, even if it may seem insignificant in this dreamlike setting, holds great significance. May you have restful and history-filled dreams. Good night.